In 1492, we had said here that there was the expulsion from Spain. So there's Spain. There are Jews who went west and they headed up to London. There are houses of trade and commerce and finance in London today which are populated by Jews. But those Jews sometimes have Spanish-sounding names because they are direct descendants of those who escaped from Spain in 1492. So some Jews went up to London, a large number went to Amsterdam. And as a result, you have some of the gem cutting that went on for many years in Amsterdam, in Belgium, was fueled originally by the Sephardic Jewish folk, who may not look dark-skinned. Many of them are very Caucasian-looking and blended in easily with Ashkenaz Jews, and until you hear the family history, you might not know. Other Jews got on boats, went down to North Africa, went down to Morocco there on the left, to Algeria, Libya, Egypt. Others actually returned to Israel. Others went to Greece. There's a large Jewish community in Salonika, in Greece there. Italy, large numbers went there. And Turkey here, very large numbers went to Turkey. My wife's grandparents grew up in Izmir, which is the biblical Smyrna. When you see the city of Smyrna in the Bible, that is today called Izmir. That is the town of my wife's grandparents. So this was the route of escape. And by this point, by 1492, Jewish people were already living there in Germany, in Austria, in the Czech Republic, in Hungary, in Budapest, in Poland. All of those areas are Ashkenaz Jewish. There was not all that much mixing. Back when I was growing up, it was still considered a mixed marriage if an Ashkenaz married a Sephardic. It was still considered, it seems quaint, but that's the way it was back at that time. So these are some of the migrations. We talked about Yemenite Jews, very religious for the most part, at least the generation that came out of Yemen. The bridal customs are very colorful. Go on YouTube and put in Yemenite Jewish wedding, and you can just be mesmerized in the dancing and the headdress and the henna. There's a whole bunch of customs that I don't have time to even touch because we need to move. A lot of material. Ashkenaz Jews. Here are some Ashkenaz Jews. The 5 kids in the middle are 5 of Ken and Ruth's, who are all Jewish. And yes, some Jewish kids have blonde hair. The photo at the upper right in our congregation in New Jersey. And lower left, 3 Jewish guys right here at Camp Shoshanah. Ashkenaz Jews at one time came through Eastern Europe, Central Europe. We are pigmentally challenged, okay? And so if you see me basking in the sun, it's an attempt to change that. Okay, so those are the various Jewish ethnic groups. So we need to talk about some very difficult things. Persecutions were very real, and whether they happened 1,000 years ago or they happened last week, they dramatically affect the Jewish psyche. Why? Because it's a matter of survival. In every generation, there is a line in the Haggadah that says, in every generation, some have arisen to try to kill us. But the Holy One, Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, always brought to us a hero or a sage. The Crusades, we touched on this historically, but now a little bit of an illustration, was the attempt by Europe under Christendom to retake the Holy Land from the Muslims. Muslims had, by violence and by force, taken all of the Holy Land. They were destroying churches, much as they are doing today in various parts of the world. And news of this filtered back to Europe, and people were alarmed. And so there was an attempt to retake the Holy Land. There were various crusades. There the First Crusade, Second Crusade, Children's Crusade. And if you really have a bent to history, these will be of interest to you. For our purpose, we need to discuss the so-called Christian aspect of this, and we had touched on it the other day. But notice that in two of these photos, the one in the center and the one on the right, the individuals are very prominently wearing or have crosses emblazed upon their uniforms. The figure of the cross, the graphic figure of the cross, has most often been used in Jewish history as the emblem of those who raped, who executed violence, who murdered, who tore families apart, and who tortured us. They wore crosses. I am well aware that there are many godly believers today who are in a very different context than Europe in the year 1200, and they've never done those things. In your context, if you are in a community where the wearing of a cross communicates that you are a follower of Jesus the Savior, then it's appropriate for you to wear a cross. And there's nothing wrong with it. But just be aware that if you go to a very different culture in which the cross has only been used as the graphic symbol of those who are demonic murderers, people are going to see the cross that you're wearing in a very different way. That's the reason we have no crosses on any of the buildings or the furniture around here. There's nothing wrong with it. It all depends on context. In the context in which we operate, we have often had, particularly in our earlier years, Jewish believers who were relatively brand new believers, whose only experience with a cross was that it hung around the neck of the bully who was pounding them and saying, "You dirty Jew, I'm going to kill you." I had near experiences like that. Every bully in my neighborhood wore a cross because they were members of a large institutional church that taught anti-Semitism. And so again, I have a whole paper. I have a little bit of a rant, a 2-page rant on this that was actually published in Ariel magazine. And it talks about this issue. And I encourage people, if the cross in your community, in your context, if the cross communicates that Jesus is our Savior, then that would be a good thing for you to wear. But if the cross communicates something negative, then it's not something to wear. And so it's not as though it is, without the graphical symbol of the cross, we have no salvation. It is a graphical symbol. The finished work of Jesus the Messiah on the cross is that which we cling to. I am a hopeless sinner, eternally removed from God, without the finished work of my Savior Jesus, who happened to die on a cross. I don't worship the torture of execution, the instrument of execution that he died upon. I recognize he died upon a cross, that history seals that, but my hope is in his finished work. And for me, there is no personal devotional value to focusing my worship on that graphical symbol. I'm talking about for me. I'm not trying to dictate what you should do, but it's important to be aware of this, and this course would have been incomplete without my saying that very uncomfortable phrase there. And so that's a reality in Jewish life. Further, was it amplified in the Spanish Inquisition, 1478 through 1650. This was primarily directed against Jews who had been forcibly converted to Roman Catholicism, but who continued to practice Judaism secretly. The Inquisition was an effort to purify the Roman Catholic Church of all those who held doctrines and practiced things outside the church. And Jewish people who had been forced to convert to Catholicism upon pain of death had been tortured in fiendish ways. Here, I've only put the most mild of the illustrations that are available to be seen. And this is, again, another reason why, for many Jewish people, the thought of joining a church is so beyond even comprehension. How could you do that? Your grandparents fled Egypt, they fled Egypt, but they fled Europe in order to avoid having to be converted. They endured a lot of difficulty, and you're just going over to, of course, the people who say that have no idea that there are fake Christians whose loyalty is to an institutional church and real Christians who have had a born-again conversion in faith in Jesus the Messiah. Those are two universes that are completely different. But Satan is the master of confusion, isn't he? And he diabolically uses the symbol of the cross, hangs it around the neck of people who kill Jews in an effort to keep Jewish people from coming to faith. And if you understand that last sentence, you'll understand a lot of what goes on in Jewish history. The New World, 1492, we had on that map, we showed that some of the Jews sailed west with Columbus. They didn't fall off the edge of the world, rather they found a new world. It was new to them. There were people already here. And so we don't imagine that somehow this world didn't exist until Europeans found it, but there was a whole entire civilization here in the Western Hemisphere. So large numbers of Jewish people would ultimately make their way to the New World. A whole interesting research project for you might be this question: was Columbus Jewish? It's a very interesting research project. There seems to be evidence that 2 generations back, the families were conversos, that they were individuals who had been pressured. The word forcibly has degrees. There are people who see it coming and they get ahead of the curve and they'll say, where do I sign up to convert? Because I can see persecution is coming. And those people generally do the best because they're kind of the first adapters. It seems very likely that Columbus's grandparents were in that group. It's a very technical discussion. It becomes a technical research. Did Columbus, in the margins of the Bible, write notes in Hebrew? We have a copy of his Bible. Are those notes in a Hebrew script? The scholars debate back and forth. But with the opening of the New World, opened a new world for Jews as well, because there was the opportunity to escape the persecution that was back in the Old World. The Levant is a kind of an interesting, colorful old term, meaning that world of the Eastern Mediterranean. In around the year 1600, I'm going to follow Steve Schermet's policy of just rounding off the dates here, but I'm not going to chop it off by 500. Around the year 1600, the Ottoman Turkish Empire is increasing in power. They have found a way to refine gunpowder that increases its velocity and makes them almost invincible on the battlefield. They invest in armaments, in early guns, and the Ottoman Turks are now spreading out and taking over. One of the areas they take over is the area of Palestine. And they're able to do this because the Arab rulers, again, Palestine has never been ruled until 1948 by indigenous natives. It's never been self-ruled until Jewish people declared independence. From the end of the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, from that time onward, it has been occupied by one power or another, until in 1948, David Ben-Gurion signs the paper and says, I declare Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel. So for many of these years, the Ottoman Turks, from 1600 until the year 1917, the Ottoman Turks are in control of Palestine. And they have a Jewish minority within their population. There are Jewish people in high places in the Ottoman Empire. In World War I, here's an interesting little tidbit for you. In World War I, when Germany and the Ottoman Empire had an axis of power, they were allies, there were Jewish people who were many officers in the Ottoman army. For some reason, and I haven't done research that deeply, a large number of officers in the Turkish Ottoman army in World War I, they were Jews. They were Jewish sergeants, Jewish lieutenants, large numbers of Jews. Their photos are available. If you do enough research, if you drill down, you'll see proud portraits. Oftentimes, when a person would get their uniform, before they would go off to war, they'd stand for a portrait in some studio in Ankara in 1915. And they were clearly well-groomed, they were intelligent, they had risen through the ranks of this Ottoman Empire that increasingly wanted to be Western. So the Ottoman Turks increasingly looked to the West for influence. Jewish people brought together the best learning out of the East and the West. They were the bridge between those two worlds. So many Jewish men wound up as officers in the Ottoman Turkish Empire. Many Jewish men wound up as officers in the German army that went to war in World War I, in the Great War. So you have Jewish soldiers and Jewish officers fighting on behalf of Germany and the Ottoman Turkish Empire, and you have Jewish officers and Jewish soldiers fighting on behalf of Britain and France and America in World War I. It probably was, in modern history, the biggest clash of one Jew against another, because they had become nationalists for their own countries. The Jews in Germany, if you ask them, what's your identity? I'm a German. Do you have another identity? Well, my grandparents were Jewish, but I'm non-practicing. I am a proud German. We've been here for 8 generations. We own land. And they value themselves. The same thing with many of the Turks. They saw themselves as Turks with loyalty to the Turks. Same thing in England. You have a world which is increasingly becoming modern, where people imagine that ethnic religious identity is something we're stepping out of into a new world. And so this was very much in view in World War I. You have increasing Jewish population in Eastern Europe, Russia, Poland, and Lithuania. You have large numbers of Jewish schools and Jewish institutions that increase in size. In your printed outline, we're here on Roman numeral 18. You also have, at this point, the development of the ghetto. In some city-states in Italy, there had been a backlash, and Jewish people were being told you can't live wherever you want to, you need to be restricted. And so one of the first, the word ghetto literally comes from, it's derived after some steps from Italian, and it referred to a certain neighborhood in Italy where Jewish people were by law forced to be. So again, if you're getting the picture that there is no one single situation for Jews around the world, you've gotten the correct picture. It's very much a patchwork. Because of that, you have very frequent Jewish emigration, moving. What does this illustrate? It illustrates the fact that Judaism is portable. It's not tied to a location. Again, part of the Abrahamic covenant said that the Jewish people would remain cohesive and they would remain identifiable. In many of these centuries, it would have been far easier for people to assimilate and to disappear. But they were told to remain as Jews. This is what fuels the emotion behind the argument, the debate today over intermarriage, with people saying, well, yes, I know you love each other, and you're cute, and it seems to be going wonderfully, but how will your children identify? We have very few Jews as it is, they would say. There's only 17 million Jews in the world, now there are going to be less. For that reason, a number of believing couples, of couples where one partner is a Messianic Jewish believer, have made a very serious commitment that they will raise their children with an appreciation for their Jewish heritage, that that's something that will be important for them. So, in the morning, next morning, we will pick up with this Roman 19, talking about Europe and the Renaissance. Thank you.